A photograph, grainy and cracked, shows a fleet of Japanese battleships lined in perfect formation, majestic, poised for dominance. Yet a broken radio intercept recovered decades later reveals a chilling silence. Orders to coordinate air and sea power never came. How could a navy so meticulously organized fail to synchronize its deadliest weapons? The paradox is stark. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered World War II with some of the most advanced warships and aircraft carriers, yet a fundamental flaw lurked beneath their calculated precision. This flaw, a rigid adherence to battleship supremacy over carrier aviation, would cost them the war. But why did this error persist, ignored or uncorrected, despite mounting evidence and catastrophic losses? What was really hiding behind the illusion of invincibility? The roots of this fatal misjudgment trace back to the pre-war era, where the Navy's upper echelons clung to tradition. Admirals, many veterans of the Russo-Japanese War, revered battleships as the ultimate symbol of naval power. A faded blueprint from 1934, annotated by a senior fleet engineer, shows the extensive resources poured into the Yamato-class battleships. Massive, heavily armored, packing 460mm guns. Meanwhile, aircraft carrier development was treated as secondary, a tool for reconnaissance rather than decisive strike. This division was not merely technical, but ideological. The Navy's internal factions, battleship advocates versus carrier proponents, fought a silent war in strategy rooms cloaked in cigarette smoke. Why did the leadership favor steel giants over the emerging air threat? Could pride and institutional inertia have blinded them to the future? At the war's outset, the Japanese fleet boasted 4 Yamato-class battleships and 10 fleet carriers, yet the battleship's physical superiority masked critical vulnerabilities. The Yamatos, each displacing over 70,000 tons, could unleash devastating broadside barrages, but their speed lagged behind faster carriers. More crucially, their anti-aircraft defenses were insufficient against massed aerial attacks. Archival schematics reveal gaps in radar installations, and limited fighter escort coordination left battleships exposed. Aircraft carriers, designed for mobility and strike reach, had a different challenge. Their air groups were limited by pilot training and aircraft range. The Navy's doctrine emphasized decisive fleet engagements dominated by battleships, a concept increasingly obsolete in the Pacific theater. How was this disconnect allowed to persist amid evolving naval warfare? The first true test came during the Battle of Midway in June 1942. The Japanese fleet aimed to lure the U.S. carriers into a trap, relying on battleships to finish the job. Instead, U.S. Navy pilots, guided by superior intelligence and radar, devastated the Japanese carriers while battleships remained sidelined. A radio transcript from a squadron commander captures the confusion. "Our carriers are burning. Where is the battleship support?" The battleship's slow response and rigid command structure rendered them ineffective in a battle decided by air power. The catastrophic loss of 4 Japanese carriers marked a turning point, exposing the fatal flaw of over-reliance on battleships. Why did the Japanese command fail to adapt tactics when the carriers were proven to be the new capital ships? The enemy response was swift and decisive. The U.S. Navy accelerated carrier production, improved pilot training, and refined coordinated strike tactics. Japanese attempts to retrofit battleships with enhanced anti-aircraft guns and radar were too little, too late. Instruction manuals recovered from a naval depot in 1943 reveal a desperate shift. Battleships were now to serve primarily as anti-aircraft platforms protecting carriers. Yet internal resistance persisted. Many admirals considered this a degradation of their battleship doctrine. Japanese pilots, meanwhile, suffered from inadequate fuel supplies and outdated aircraft designs, unable to match American technological advances. How did these internal contradictions sabotage Japan's ability to counter evolving threats effectively? By 1944, the crisis deepened. The Battle of the Philippine Sea showcased the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, with Japanese carrier air power decimated and battleships unable to project influence beyond their limited range. Resources funneled into new battleship construction, including the unfinished Shinano converted from a carrier hull, reflected a stubborn refusal to abandon old paradigms. A strategic map from Imperial Navy headquarters illustrates a shrinking perimeter, yet command protocols remained rigid. Orders flowed top-down with little room for initiative or innovation? The question lingers. Was the failure a consequence of flawed strategy alone, or did an entrenched culture of obedience and hubris seal their fate? The Japanese admiral's greatest mistake was clear. An unwavering belief in battleship supremacy blinded them to the ascendance of carrier-based warfare. This strategic myopia cost them not only battles, but the entire Pacific War. Attempts to rectify the error were hampered by institutional pride, slow bureaucratic inertia, and a flawed command culture that discouraged questioning. The result was a Navy unable to adapt quickly enough to technological and tactical revolutions around them. How did such a powerful military force allow a single doctrinal error to determine its downfall? And why, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, did they refuse to change course until it was too late? Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. Beneath the surface of official reports, whispered conversations from surviving officers reveal an unsettling truth. The Japanese Navy's leadership was fractured by fear as much as by pride. A faded journal entry from a mid-ranking admiral penned in late 1942 describes a meeting heavy with tension, voices hushed, eyes averted, as commanders debated the relevance of battleships while the carrier fleet lay in ruins. The admiral's scrawled note: "Voices rise against change, yet silence court disaster." The scent of stale tobacco mingled with the metallic chill of war rooms, a suffocating atmosphere where dissent was dangerous. Why did such internal warnings fail to permeate the command structure? Was this a failure of communication or a willful blindness to inconvenient truths? Technological advances only deepened the divide. The U.S. Navy's introduction of radar-directed fire control systems and carrier-based Hellcat fighters starkly contrasted with Japan's slower adoption of similar innovations. Shipyard blueprints show incremental upgrades to battleship anti-aircraft batteries, yet these improvements lagged behind American developments by months, sometimes years. Meanwhile, pilot training programs, according to declassified training logs, suffered from attrition and resource shortages. The imbalance between technological progress and operational capacity widened. How could a Navy that once prided itself on innovation fall so far behind? Did bureaucratic inertia choke the flow of vital information? Or was there sabotage in the prioritization of resources? At the heart of this failure was a command culture that prized hierarchy over adaptability. Transcripts from intercepted communications reveal a rigid chain of command where subordinates hesitated to report bad news or propose radical changes. A terse message from a carrier captain after the Battle of the Coral Sea reads, "Request permission to adjust tactics. Awaiting orders." The delay proved fatal. A dimly lit war room photo, depicting maps scattered with red and blue markers, captures the paralysis of decision-making as battles raged. Could this systemic rigidity explain why the admirals did not revise their strategy? Was the culture of obedience a strategic asset or a fatal flaw? Even as the war turned decisively against Japan, some officers pushed for reform. A confidential memorandum from 1944 outlines a proposed shift to prioritize carrier development and integrated air-sea tactics. Yet the document was marked "denied" with a red stamp, buried in archives until decades later. The reasons remain obscured: fear of undermining established authority, concern about morale, or disbelief in the new strategic realities. The photograph of a dismissed admiral, his face shadowed and eyes downcast, suggests the cost of challenging orthodoxy was exile. How much potential was lost because innovation was stifled by tradition and politics. The psychological toll on crews was immense. Memoirs from surviving sailors speak of confusion and frustration as battleships, once symbols of invincibility, became vulnerable targets. The roar of aircraft engines replaced the thunder of naval guns as the decisive sound of battle. A faded war diary notes the smell of burning fuel and metal mingled with salt air during desperate retreats. Morale plummeted as the Navy's once feared battleships were outmatched by agile carriers and swarming aircraft. Did the leadership underestimate the human dimension of warfare? Could a more flexible strategy have preserved not just ships, but the spirit of the fleet? As the American island-hopping campaign advanced, Japan's naval losses accelerated. The Admiralty's maps, annotated with shrinking red zones, chart a retreat that seemed inevitable. Yet the refusal to abandon battleship primacy persisted until the final months. A newly commissioned battleship, completed in 1945 but never seeing action, stands as a mute testament to strategic stubbornness. In the underground command bunkers, the air was thick with regret and desperation. Was the defeat solely a matter of resources and firepower, or did an unyielding mindset doom the Navy from within? What lessons were lost in the shadows of that defeat? In the final months of the conflict, a clandestine report surfaced within the higher echelons of the Japanese Navy, a desperate plea for a radical overhaul of naval doctrine. The report, smuggled out by a junior intelligence officer, detailed the catastrophic consequences of clinging to battleship primacy. Its margins were crowded with frantic notes: urgent reallocation of pilots, carrier fleet rebuild critical, air defense coordination failing. Yet this document, buried deep within classified archives, never reached frontline commanders in time. The rusted hinges of bureaucracy and fear of admitting defeat sealed its fate. A blurred photograph shows the report's cover page, stained with coffee and anxiety. How could such a critical warning be silenced? Was it the weight of tradition, or a calculated choice to maintain morale? Simultaneously, the industrial capacity of Japan was strained to the breaking point. Shipyards, once bustling with the construction of grand battleships, struggled to produce enough planes and carriers. Factory blueprints revealed that raw materials were prioritized for oversized naval guns rather than aircraft production. Witness reports from dock workers described the acrid smell of burning steel mingled with the dust of abandoned aircraft parts. Efforts to retrofit existing battleships with anti-aircraft weaponry diverted precious resources but yielded diminishing returns. Could this misallocation be attributed to strategic miscalculation, or did political factions within the Navy deliberately preserve battleship projects as symbols of prestige? Amid these logistical nightmares, communication breakdowns worsened. Radio logs intercepted by Allied cryptographers expose instances where orders to reposition carrier groups never reached their targets. One chilling entry records a squadron commander pleading over static-filled channels. No confirmation of fleet movement, left exposed. The static was more than technical interference. It symbolized the fragmentation of command. Maps of Pacific engagements, overlaid with zones of lost contact, depict a Navy increasingly unable to coordinate its scattered forces. How did the loss of communication exacerbate the already critical strategic errors? Was this a technical failure, or indicative of deeper systemic collapse? Morale among the sailors and pilots plummeted as the war dragged on. Letters recovered from a carrier pilot describe a growing sense of fatalism. We fly into storms blind, knowing the battleships we once trusted now sit idle. The smell of burnt aviation fuel and the constant drone of enemy aircraft became the soundtrack of despair. A faded photograph captures a group of young pilots, faces gaunt and eyes hollow, gathered around a battered aircraft engine. Did the leadership's refusal to adapt erode not only strategic capability, but the very will to fight? Could a more flexible approach have preserved the fighting spirit long enough to alter the course of the war? Even as defeat loomed, the entrenched battleship doctrine cast a long shadow over Japan's naval strategy. Secret meetings recorded in memoirs of surviving officers reveal heated debates where younger commanders urged a shift toward carrier-centric tactics. Yet their voices were drowned out by senior admirals, steadfast in their conviction that the decisive battle would be won by gunfire, not aircraft. The dimly lit conference room, captured in a rare photograph, is heavy with smoke and tension. Was this stubbornness a matter of honor, fear, or misjudgment? What price was paid for the Navy's inability to embrace the changing face of warfare? In this final, desperate phase, the Navy's last hope hinged on the innovative but incomplete aircraft carrier Shinano, converted from a battleship hull. Its launch in late 1944 was shrouded in secrecy, a symbol of attempted adaptation. Yet within weeks, Shinano was sunk by a U.S. submarine before it could join the fleet. The wreckage, photographed during a later salvage operation, lies broken on the ocean floor. A haunting metaphor for missed opportunity. Had Shinano been completed and deployed earlier, could it have altered the balance? Or was it too little, too late? A tragic emblem of a navy trapped by its own history and doctrine? The sinking of Shinano was not merely a tactical loss, but a symbolic collapse of a flawed strategy that had consumed the Imperial Japanese Navy. In the war's waning days, fragmented fleets scoured the Pacific, their commanders grappling with the consequences of years of strategic inertia. A weathered navigation chart, annotated with hastily marked retreat routes, illustrates a navy fighting to preserve what little remained. Communications were sporadic, morale fractured, and the once proud battleships now relics overshadowed by the relentless dominance of carrier-based air power. Was this the inevitable end of a navy that refused to evolve, or a tragedy born from the clash between tradition and innovation? In the aftermath, surviving officers recounted a bitter realization. Their greatest enemy had been not just the Allied forces, but their own inability to discard outdated doctrines. Post-war analyses, drawn from declassified documents, highlight a stubborn adherence to hierarchy that stifled initiative and adaptation. The smell of ink on countless strategic reports, many ignored, some suppressed, lingered long after the guns fell silent. A final photograph shows a solitary admiral, his eyes distant, standing among rusting warships. What haunted him most? The overwhelming defeat, or the knowledge that it might have been avoided? This catastrophic error, overvaluing battleships while underestimating carrier aviation, was a strategic blind spot that cost Japan the Pacific War. Attempts to correct it were repeatedly stifled by a rigid command culture, resource misallocation, and communication failures. The very symbol of Japan's naval pride became a millstone, dragging down their ability to respond to a rapidly changing battlefield. How did such a powerful navy allow itself to be undone by a single, uncorrected mistake? And what lessons does this hold for military strategy today?